Imagine a young woman confined to a tower, her liberty stripped away, a prince ascending her golden locks. We're all familiar with this classic story. Yet what if Rapunzel existed beyond fantasy? What if her narrative wasn't created, but rather preserved through generations? An echo of something much older and much more sinister. A real person held captive for her convictions, her long hair removed as punishment. And what if her remains still rest beneath a sacred space to this day? The fairy tale concealed the reality, but the concealment was incomplete. Before we explore the authentic account behind the real Rapunzel, let's revisit the version we believe we understand. There once lived a husband and wife in a small house positioned next to a fortified garden belonging to a sorceress. The wife discovered she was carrying a child and developed an intense desire for a particular plant that grew only in that forbidden garden, a root vegetable among thorns called rampion, sometimes known as Rapunzel. She wanted nothing else and rejected every other meal. As time went on, the woman grew weaker. Her desperate husband scaled the wall at night and gathered the herb to save her. The sorceress discovered him in the act. Her glare burned like fire. He pleaded for forgiveness, and the enchantress, grinning wickedly, allowed him to take all the rampion he needed if he would give her his unborn child. Upon the girl's birth, the magic user arrived as arranged. She called the girl Rapunzel and spirited her away. Rapunzel matured into a girl of stunning beauty with hair gleaming like golden thread. At age 12, the sorceress led her into the forest and confined her in a tower with no staircase, no entrance, just one circular chamber at the peak and one small opening high above. She was locked inside. The enchantress would arrive each day and call up, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, release your hair." In response, Rapunzel would unfurl her braid until it reached the ground below. The sorceress would ascend it, gripping tightly. Seasons changed. A royal visitor journeyed through the woods and caught the sound of Rapunzel's voice, bright and crystal clear like a bell ringing through the air. He could not see her, only hear her voice. He returned repeatedly, drawn by the melody. Eventually, he witnessed the enchantress summon the tower and observed her grip and climb the golden braid. After the sorceress departed, he gathered his courage and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, release your hair." Believing it was the witch, she obeyed. The prince climbed to her chamber. Love blossomed between them. Each night he returned, and they made arrangements together. He would bring silk thread gradually so she could fashion a rope ladder and flee the tower. They would journey away together, beyond the reach of her captor. However, their escape never occurred. One morning, Rapunzel innocently mentioned to the sorceress that her dress no longer fit properly around her middle. Her body, she noted, was expanding, though she couldn't explain why. The witch's expression hardened, her tone became threatening. "Treacherous girl," she spat. "How can this be? I thought I had removed you from the world, but you have deceived me." She grabbed Rapunzel's hair, produced scissors, and sliced the braid away completely. Following this, she drove Rapunzel out into the wild to survive on her own. When the prince came that night and called for Rapunzel, the sorceress let fall the severed braid instead. He started climbing, anticipating her presence. But at the top waited the witch, not his love. So, the sorceress declared, "You sought your beloved, but the songbird has departed and sings no longer. The predator has seized her and will claw out your eyes as well." The prince, overwhelmed with sorrow, leaped from the tower. He plummeted into thorn bushes below. He endured the fall, but thorns pierced his eyes, leaving him sightless. For years, the prince wandered blindly across wild lands, without hope, holding only to the memory of her voice. Then one day, carried on the breeze, he heard it. That same beautiful voice that once came from the tower. Faint, delicate, unmistakable. He followed the sound and discovered Rapunzel. She rushed to him, weeping. In their embrace, her tears fell into his sightless eyes and restored his vision. At her feet stood two young children, a boy and a girl, the offspring she had carried and delivered alone in the wilderness. Together Rapunzel, the prince, and their children, they made their way to his realm. And for the first time, they lived without chains. Yet not all versions conclude so peacefully. The account you heard came from the written collection by the Brothers Grimm, recorded in their first anthology of folklore. Their objective was modest, to document the traditional narratives of German culture, folk stories carried through time by word of mouth. However, their publication unexpectedly attracted a broad audience of families and young readers. In subsequent printings, the Rapunzel account was toned down. The prince now proposed engagement on their first evening together. And Rapunzel's pregnancy no longer revealed her secret. Instead, she carelessly mentioned the prince to the witch. Yet long before the Grimm brothers wrote their version, others had shared this story, and their variations were more disturbing and unsettling. In 1634, Italian author Giambattista Basile released a narrative titled Petronella. Similar to Rapunzel, the protagonist is removed from her family, confined in a tower, and uses her extended braid as a climbing aid for her keeper. Yet in this account, it's not a sorceress but an ogress. And Petronella demonstrates agency. She's resourceful and manages to break free. Using 3 enchanted nuts, one that becomes a fierce hound, one a massive tiger, and one a ferocious wolf, she creates diversions to evade the ogress pursuing her. Later, in 1698, French writer Charlotte Rose de Caumont de la Force composed Persian, appearing romantic on the surface, though concealing darker elements beneath. It was Persian that initially established the most disturbing components of what we call Rapunzel today. The protagonist's hidden conception, the villain's plot that causes the prince's fall and loss of sight, the twin children delivered in isolation, and the miraculous tears that return his vision. This wasn't entertainment for young audiences. This was a narrative exploring attraction, outcome, and the toll of unfulfilled yearning. And fundamentally, it centered on the plant itself. Petronella and Persian both reference parsley. Rapunzel, or rampion, derives from a wild flowering plant, a bellflower type that flourished across Europe. Its foliage was consumed like greens, and its pale bulbous base was crisp and mild like a radish. But this craving for it meant the expectant mother forfeited all else. A longing that cursed her unborn offspring. It echoes the biblical narrative of Eve before her transgression, reaching for something prohibited and facing ruin. But perhaps behind this tale stands an actual person. Her narrative speaks of resistance, and legend claims her remains lie beneath a holy site still. She was called Barbara, born to a high-ranking family devoted to pagan worship. She lived during the 3rd century under Emperor Maximian's rule in Heliopolis, presently called Baalbek in contemporary Lebanon. She possessed wisdom, conviction, and grace. Her father attempted to arrange a union with a Persian nobleman, but Barbara declined, so he imprisoned her in a tower attached to his residence. Rather than crushing her, the isolation only strengthened her resolve. Sequestered in the tower, Barbara embraced Christian teachings, rejecting her father's religion. But she wouldn't stay silent. While her father was away, she instructed construction workers renovating a bathing facility to make an addition rich with meaning. She had them construct a 3rd opening on the wall facing south, representing the Christian concept of the Trinity. Upon her father's return and discovery of this modification, he erupted in fury. Barbara was apprehended and delivered to Roman officials. They subjected her to severe pain. She was whipped, burned, and abraded with sharp implements. Yet she maintained her convictions. Before her death, her lengthy hair was cut short as a final degradation. Her own father brought her to a hilltop and executed her himself. Afterwards, he was said to have been killed instantly by a lightning strike. A follower named Valentines provided Barbara with burial. Her resting place became known for divine interventions. She was venerated as a holy martyr, and her memory persisted across generations. However, there's a complication. Many question whether she was a real person. The earliest written account of her life surfaces during the 7th century, centuries following her supposed demise in the 3rd. Around this era, her narrative spread throughout Europe, reinterpreted, enriched, and formalized in works such as the Golden Legend, a widely read medieval work that elevated saints into archetypal figures. Throughout the ages, pieces of Barbara's account may have gradually mixed into popular stories, evolving and merging to eventually create the tale we recognize as Rapunzel. In 1969, the Catholic hierarchy quietly withdrew St. Barbara's commemorative day from their official schedule, noting insufficient historical confirmation. And yet, the timeframe aligns with a well-established era of religious violence. Lebanese communities continue to observe her remembrance annually, donning garments, crafting baked goods, and recounting her history. Her location, her father's actions, the bathing structure, all these elements are anchored in a verifiable historical setting. Bathing establishments held paramount importance in Roman society, particularly within upper-class circles. Beyond Barbara's birthplace stands a Roman architectural marvel, a monumental water feature constructed around a natural spring. Set into the mountainside with architectural features and an engraved representation of a divine female form, it mirrors the holy fountains of classical civilization. Some propose this could be the bathhouse referenced in Barbara's account, or perhaps a comparable site where such a narrative could emerge. Possibly, the legend of this regional female deity carved into ancient stone centuries prior was eventually absorbed, transformed, and converted into the holy figure we recognize as Saint Barbara. It's conceivable that all of this remains purely fictional, of course, but then there's the physical remains. Following tradition, Barbara's cadaver was relocated to Constantinople in the 6th century. Subsequently, in 1108, her skeletal remains were granted as a component of a royal dowry. When the Byzantine Emperor Alexius Komnenos' daughter married a Russian prince, she transported the holy woman's body with her to Kiev. The remains were placed in a shrine within a cathedral and have remained there continuously. In the present day, that same body still rests within the ornate interior of St. Vladimir's Cathedral, displayed behind glass, venerated by worshippers. Generations after the religious authorities questioned her authenticity, her physical form endures. It can be observed. It can be visited. So if Barbara was merely legend, whose remains are these? Whatever this woman was, her form was deemed deserving of reverence, significant enough to be incorporated into an imperial marriage contract. But what if Rapunzel's narrative connects to something much older than any saint or martyr? Because across different civilizations and time periods, narratives featuring long-haired females confined, watched, altered, honored keep surfacing. In a 10th-century Persian narrative, the Shah name, the aristocratic Lady Radaba develops feelings for Prince Zal. Separated by distance, he looks up toward her isolated chamber. Thus Radaba uncoils her dark hair, welcoming him to ascend. But Zal declines, not because he lacks desire, but because he worries harm might come to her. Thus, he employs a cord instead. A touching moment in ancient storytelling, and one of the earliest occurrences of the hair rope climbing motif. Then consider Sif, a figure from Norse tradition, a woman whose abundant golden locks embodied her pride until Loki stole inside and severed them while she was resting. To make restitution, he commissioned magical craftsmen to fashion replacement locks spun from actual precious metal. Yet several experts propose Sif's locks represented something more profound than mere beauty. They interpret it as symbolizing grain fields of gold, harvest cycles, and the timeless patterns of agricultural rebirth. Sif has historically been linked to productivity, domestic stability, and the sacred nature of matrimonial bonds. And something even more intriguing emerges. The Grimm brothers themselves observed that in archaic linguistic usage, precious metal was occasionally designated as Sif's tresses. Literally, Sif's hair. But most strikingly, they discovered mention of a botanical specimen designated Sif's hair, right now known as Polytrichum aureum, a moss-like plant with a golden sheen. Which takes us back to Rapunzel, also identified by a plant and distinguished by her golden hair. Could the folk narrative be descended from this earlier Norse tradition? And then there's Danae. In ancient Greek lore, she was the offspring of King Acrisius of Argos. A prophecy cautioned him that his future heir would murder him. To forestall this destiny, he confined Danae far from civilization. In certain versions, it was a locked room or sealed chamber. In others, a tower stood as her prison. Zeus appeared not in person but as a cascade of golden rain, trickling through openings in the walls. Danae became expectant and birthed Perseus, the legendary warrior destined to bring about his grandfather's destruction. This element recurs across mythology and history. A female is sequestered to maintain her chastity, to avert catastrophe, to dictate her circumstances. Yet isolation brings no safety. Eventually, the dreaded outcome transpires regardless. This reflects a much older pattern, and it extends into yet another well-known tale. Sleeping Beauty, in which an unconscious princess, a doomed prediction, and a prince whose advances aren't always appreciated converge in one of the most perplexing origin narratives ever conceived. See the full account now. Until our next exploration, take care.